All right, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Darren Britton, and I am the National Assistive Technology Project Officer at the Australian Disability Clearinghouse on Education and Training, or ADCET for short. This workshop is being live captioned, and to activate the captions, click on the CC button in the toolbar that's located either at the top or the bottom of your screen. And we also have captions available via the browser, and we'll put a link into chat to look at those external captions. Please feel free to leave your camera on, but remember that this session is being recorded. You can turn it off if you wish. And please leave your mic muted unless you're invited to ask a question from us. Today's workshop, Accessibility Basics Part 2, Building Resources that Support Universal Design for Learning, will be presented by myself and Justin Wiley. Over this 90 minutes of this workshop, we'll explain and demonstrate a few more key accessibility building blocks that support universal design for learning approach to learning resources. This session will also have a couple of hands-on elements as our previous one, and some sample resources will be provided so you can develop your own accessibility practice alongside our presentation today, and we'll put a link to that document up into chat shortly for you to download. Before we begin, a few more housekeeping details. As I said, this workshop is being live captioned by Donna from Bradley reporting. Thank you, Donna. And the recording will be made available on ADCET in the coming days. If you have any technical difficulties, please email admin@adcet.edu.au. That's admin@adcet.edu.au. This workshop will run for around 90 minutes with a short break halfway through. And throughout the presentation, feel free to use the chat box to chat box with us to chat with each other and with us. But please remember to choose the everyone so that everyone can see what you have to say. We're happy to answer your questions throughout the workshop. And if you have a question or would like asked, please use the Q&A box rather than in chat, as we may miss some of the questions in there. So let's get started. Welcome. I'll just throw to Justin for a quick welcome.
Hi, thanks, Darren. Hi, everybody, and thanks for those people who've come back for the second session. We're looking forward to just giving you some more of those basic accessibility tips that you can hopefully go back and apply straight away. We did have some feedback from the last session. There were some people who were looking for some more in-depth information, but this session is really about simple, sustainable ideas and strategies that you can use straight away. But maybe there'll be something further down the track, a little bit more advanced. But yeah, thank you for coming along.
Excellent. Thank you, Justin. Next slide. Just before we begin, I'd just like to do acknowledgement of country, and in the spirit of reconciliation, we'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. And we pay our respect to their elders, past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. While virtually connected today, we are presenting geographically dispersed and acknowledge the lands from which we are joining and presenting. That is the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, where I'm located in Victoria, and the Butchalla people, traditional owners of Gari, formerly Fraser Island on the Fraser Coast, which I found out recently as well, trying to look up Fraser Island and go, I can't find it on the map anymore. And that's why it's now called Gari. Fantastic place, fantastic island if you ever get the chance to go up there and get immersed in some of the culture. It's absolutely beautiful. Thank you, Justin. So quickly today, as we're saying, 90-minute workshop with a short break there in the middle. You can engage in the workshop in multiple ways. Please feel free to sit back and just listen if you want and to watch. You can download the document. The link to that will be in the chat. You can grab that work along with us if you'd like. It will also be available with the recording after the session. As per the previous one, we will be a little bit heavily PC bias and Microsoft Word bias with how we're explaining some of the accessibility basics today, but we will put in some Mac alternatives as some links inside that document as well for those that are there. But please, if you are on a Mac and you know some of the keyboard shortcuts or where some of these functions are located, then please feel free to share that in chat as well. We were definitely very happy and very pleased to see so much engagement in the chat last time, and just purely the levels of expertise of people that were in the room and willingness to share their hints and tips around accessibility. Because again, one size does not fit all, and we all approach this slightly differently. So thank you very much for sharing and caring. It's wonderful to see. Today, we'll be covering tables very briefly. We're not going to get too in-depth with those. Using color and color contrast, clear and concise language when putting content together, a little bit around file naming, and using accessibility checkers. So without too much more from me, I'll just throw over to Justin and we'll start off on our first thing, and that's where we didn't quite fit things in at the last session, and that was with tables. Thank you, Justin.
All right, just unmute myself. Thank you, Darren. Yeah, so look, someone just had a question about whether we're working with the same doc as last week. So there's a new document there, and Kylie's popped a link in the chat to download it. Tables. So one of the first things about tables is to consider whether or not you actually need to use them, because they do bring up some accessibility issues. So deciding whether or not it's absolutely necessary, can you display the same information in a bullet list, or can you use headings and content instead to make it easily navigatable using assistive tech and also to scan? But if there's a reason for using it, that it does have to be tabular data and it does need that format to be able to make sense of it, then there's some important things that you need to make sure you're aware of when adding the tables in Word. So the context we're talking about here is you need to add some tabular data to your types of farming document that show the reduction in the number of dairy farms in Australia. So again, firstly, reflect, do I really need it to be a table? Can I do it another way? If not, if it does have to be a table, then it's really important that you have uniform tables in Word, and that each row has the same number of cells. Assistive tech, and I'm sure if there's any assistive tech users here today, can tell you that the way the data is read in a table, if it's not set up correctly, means that it's very hard to make a mental picture of and to understand and work with. So having the same number of cells in each row, not merging cells. We can see down here an example of district here where there's merged cells, things like that. So don't merge cells across columns and rows, and insert row and column headers as appropriate. So we have our row headers down on the left, and we have column headers over on the at the top of columns, and that's the important information that gets read out with different screen readers or assistive tech to give context to the data, and to make sense of it. So Darren, what did you want to add there about tables? Oh, you're on mute.
Technology befuddles me. No, just that we've put a couple of tables in there. So that first one, again, eyes can be deceiving in many ways. So that first table, if you click on that, Justin, and this is something that comes up quite often, it's actually not a table at all. It's an image of a table. You see this quite often in text, especially where things have been recreated from a previous unit or from a previous existing resource, and getting the data across sometimes isn't easy. So people often resort to the simplest way to do things, and that's quickly grab a screen grab of it and put that in. Now that data and the information that's in that table has become completely inaccessible. Trying to do some alt text for that, unless it's really just to show an image of what a table might look like, it's probably not worth describing all the data, and that would be too much text to be considered a small alt text anyway. So it's better to recreate it as a real table if the table data is needed. So that's actually not a table, it's just a visual representation of a table. The next one that's there with an election count for that as well, again, looks like tabular data, but it's actually not. It's just tabs and spacing that's been put inside the document to make it line up. Again, very difficult then to navigate because you don't know what's a column, what's a row necessarily. And if there's lots of data, it can become even more confusing as to what that is. So a screen reader might just be reading that left to right, and it just would make no sense whatsoever as to what that is, and you wouldn't know that it's a table. Now to see the tabs, there's a little function, the paragraph function. Sorry, Justin, I'm throwing this at you at the last minute. Yes, just up there where you were, little paragraph up, to the right.
That
yes.
one. Oh, yes, sorry. Yeah.
that turns on the formatting inside the document for you, so you can see where there's paragraph marks. You can see all the arrows there, tab spacings that are in there, and all of these kind of things can get read out and just become confusing with verbosity as well. So you can see just by that that's not a real table. It's just text that's laid out with the tab key. So while it might look good, it's not that functional. A proper table will be the one that's below that comes in again, that you've got, as Justin said, the same number of rows and columns, same number of cells, not same number of rows and columns, same number of cells that are there. And there's the way to make that more accessible. So Justin, if you want to just take over.
Okay. So with our table, what we want to make sure is that we have row and header options set. So what we do is select the table, click on that in the corner, and then we have, now excuse me, I've got little Zoom windows that are in my way at the moment. So we go out to the layout ribbon, table design ribbon, and we've got options here to set header rows and first column rows. And then that way, when this is read out with assistive tech, the labels from those headings are used in combination with the data in the cells to give them context. So turning those ones on, I'll select repeat header rows. So that's about going over pages, Darren, I think. Is that right?
Yep. So if we select the table.
Yep.
Again.
And table design.
Yep. So there's those, but then the layout option that's there. Yep. And there is repeat over to
repeat
the right.
Header rows. There we go.
Header rows. Yep.
So having that on means that if the table's a large one and goes between pages, that those header rows are going to be repeated and give context and meaning to the table. The other thing is that you can also use, as we talked about last week with references, you can insert a table of tables. So you can give your table a caption, which gives it context again, and then that can be used in a table of tables at the beginning of your document, like an automatic contents page, and make it easier to navigate to those resources, and also for you as a developer, for you to navigate to those resources quickly as well.
There's also some quick ways, which I don't want to spend too much time on, with tables, and whether anybody's played with putting tables to text and then text to tables. So sometimes if you've got badly merged data and your cells get all confused and you can't split them and things, you can select a table, go to your table menu, table design, is it?
Yeah.
One of those where the table is, and maybe the layout. Towards the end there, you've got convert to text. So if you had some dodgy cells and everything here, you convert it, and we can say, do I want to do it with tabs in there or paragraph marks? In this case, we could do it with tabs. That same text is now set up with those tabs in there. So if you turn your paragraph marks on, Justin, I know I'm quickly rushing through this, so there's something you can play with a bit slower when you've got a chance with the recording. So you can see there's an equal number of tabs in there, there's an equal number of spaces. So that text, I can do the same thing. I can go back and turn that data.
Now where do you do that?
I've got to right click and then go into, I've lost it. I know, I've lost the table tab.
Yeah. No, somewhere. I can do that way. I've never done the other way. Yeah.
Just go back to insert.
Yeah, insert. Sorry, yes. Yes. Thank you.
Table, no.
No, there's a text to table function.
Yeah, with the down arrow.
In the table, yeah. So
in the
table.
Yep. There you are.
Yep, convert text. Yep. And so again, if it's well set up, it will tell you the equal number of rows, and you can double check that it's the right rows, right columns, etc. Alexandra, you had a quick question.
Sorry, just had to unmute. Yeah, look, I was just getting a bit confused about the table header rows. But I do have one question, and that is, you know how you started off by saying that the tables are problematic, okay? And I get that, but then sometimes I use them because it lays out the information really well. So what's the suggestion? I'm sort of I lost the thread of it a bit.
Yeah, so I think so when you're choosing a table, you shouldn't be using it just for layout purposes alone, because then that does cause navigation issues for
Yep.
assistive tech. So yeah, so it's a matter of just choosing the best option. So if it's necessary, yes, there are cases where you do need to use it. But other than that, yeah, maybe look at some alternatives.
With the row header, there was a suggestion to repeat it or copy and paste it.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I think someone's answered it in that if you go over to another page, and that makes sense, because I find that difficult because I've got to scroll back up and go, okay, what is that? What that's about?
Yeah. So it should be repeat header rows. Oh, it's taken me. If I continue to a new page, which might take a while, it should repeat that header row. Forget that.
That's all right.
It's becoming a very long
We
document.
can breathe while we're waiting.
There we go. Did that go to the second page?
Data. No, it's not. It's not doing it because.
Oh, it's just moving the table. Yeah, okay.
Okay.
But if it was, if that goes that quickly.
So is the purpose? All I wanted to be clear about. I think I know, but I just want to be clear. When we repeat it, it means that the person doesn't have to scroll back up to the original page.
All right. They'll see that repeated.
It's good for everybody, right?
Exactly. Absolutely.
I mean, if like me, you've probably looked at some research papers with a lot of data in there, and you start scrolling through, and if you've got 3-4 pages of tabular data, and you're like, I don't know what's what now. I've got to go back. And it just becomes frustrating.
Yeah. All right. Thanks. I don't want to take.
It's similar to maybe locking that top row or something inside Excel, so that when you scroll the data, you've still got the information visually there, I suppose.
Okay. Oh, don't talk about Excel. That's another field for me.
Tables, again, the preference is don't use them for layout. And again, we don't want to be locked into assuming everybody's looking at the document how you're looking at it, how you're laying it out. So somebody might use that same table and they were looking at it on their phone. That table may not fit how you designed it in a Word document originally, so it's just not going to flow very well.
I was thinking,
all get bunched up and crushed, so you're actually doing a disservice for using any other format.
I was using it in PowerPoints, I guess, because I do like the fact that you can have. So what I would do is make the lines invisible, but I liked it because the information was in a nice, even, I block it to the left, and then I felt like it was easier to read. Does that make sense? So I made the lines borders
for a visual learner. Yeah, someone who's able to see the screen. Yeah.
So what's the alternative is my question. If you want to have lots of bits of data, how you demonstrated before where there was no table, but there was information, there was data. So
I think I'd probably be trying to put headers to the columns and rows to give it context, so that, because I'm just trying to think of an example where you need to use just for layout purposes alone, because you can still use headings and subheadings and things like that in a paragraph to get that information across. But look, there is a trade-off between visual design, and I know when I started working in multimedia, it was called multimedia back in the late 90s, that I was very visual. I had no idea about accessibility.
And that's my problem. Yeah. That's my problem, because I come from an art design background. So I was like, oh, this looks so much better. But anyway, I don't want to occupy too much time. Thank you.
Thank you. Look, there's lots of great suggestions in chat there, and we'll put all these key bits that people have pointed out there. John, Ray, and that have got some really good tips there about using some shapes and reading orders. So there's some ways you can still visually arrange some things, but specify a particular reading order that will help. And again, some of those are along the lines with that context, about making sure that you've got some alt text that's describing things, possibly, or making sure that it's clear to everybody what the intent is. So, trying to fix it just for visual learners means that you're actually not covering everybody at the same time. So, there's a fine line there, but there's lots of tips, and we could spend an entire workshop just on tables, and we'd still have another 90 minutes of discussion to go on that. So we'll quickly move on from that. Thank you, Justin. And may I just say that's the last thing that we're doing about cow farming and information there. So we were hoping to wrap that up in the first document. So we'll just want to quickly move on to colour.
Yeah, so look, colour is very important, and I have a personal experience with this. In that my son has colour vision deficiency. I think that's what it's called now. So yeah, he is colourblind, and in the first sentence there, he's had assessments where something's been highlighted as important just using colour alone, and he's missed it because he sees that as black. And so when using colour, it's important to use colours that can be clearly distinguished from other colours, or an example like this, if it's something important, I'd be bolding that as well, so that if someone, you're not just relying on colour alone to give the meaning or make it identifiable. But what we're talking about here is that we're making sure we use colours that are easily distinguishable from other colours. So for all text, we need to use foreground and background colours that have a high contrast. And if you're not sure about contrast colour levels, use the default ones that are available. Or, as we're going to touch on at the end of the session, use the accessibility checker to detect if the colour contrast is high enough. So we've got some examples here of some texts that can be problematic. So white writing on a light coloured background will come up with a colour contrast error for accessibility because it makes it difficult to read for some people. And even picking things like highlight colours, you need to be aware that if you're highlighting something, that you're choosing a colour that is not going to cause issues for people accessing it, with colour, with vision issues. So I just see in the chat, someone said, should we be using bold or strong? So yeah, I'm talking about in Word, we just use bold, but in HTML, using strong is the way to use it instead of using the bold tag. As far as I know, there's no difference in Word. It's just bolding it, but
no, there is strong in there as well.
Oh, is there? Right.
Yeah. So if you look at all the options under styles, you'll see that strong's in there as well. There's emphasis and then there's strong as well. You have to do all of the styles. You're just seeing a particular set of styles at the moment.
Yeah. So
see strong there.
Yeah,
yeah, there it is. Strong right there in the middle.
Oh, there, right. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'd be interested to see that, because I know that I have particular issues when I'm copying content or I'm working on content that's been copied to the LMS from a Word document.
Yep, that's what I was thinking. So if you're copying it across, I think bold is so strong is what I'm hearing a lot more rather than bold, because strong gives you that more, or even emphasis. There's a few things where they're sort of suggesting, because that'll be the style type, so it's going to be blatantly obvious as to what it is versus just making something sort of blacker.
That's excellent. Thank you for that. That's very good to know. Yeah, okay. So in terms of color, Darren, did you want to jump in here?
Just without getting too hung up on the fact that this is a chart and accessibility of those kind of things, from the visual aspect, and this is something people may have seen before, relying again on that, using just color alone to represent some information. If this is viewed in grayscale, and Justin might be able to quickly show his in grayscale. Let's change the presentation to grayscale. You can see the colors will certainly get lost, or if somebody prints this out in black and white.
Is that coming through as grayscale now, Darren?
No, that hasn't changed.
That shortcut, it's worked for my end. It doesn't seem to
okay. It's
come through. So I'm seeing this display. There's a shortcut in Windows, Windows key Control-C, and it will display. So if on your own document, if you wanted to do...
If you've got it turned on, may I say, you need to go into ease of access, and we'll provide instructions after the video with with the recording on how to set up that, because then you can swap your screen instantly to grayscale. So in ease of access, and you can see how things look. So, but this was put as reference to see not only is there color, but you can also alter a pattern that's in a table of data that you're putting in, or a chart, should I say, in this sense. So you can change to, you need to bring it up on the side. Yeah, just go picture and then, or more fill colors.
No, hang on, it's over here. No. Dang. Had it just before.
Yeah. That's right. Just pick gradient. No.
Sorry, Darren.
Pick gradient, and it should pop up to the side function where you had the change. a fill. Yep, to just more gradient at the bottom. There we go. You get the bar at the side.
Oh, there we go.
So now you can select patterns for the fill at the side. See, you've got the list of no fill solid, which is what the colors were to start with. Now you can still do a color that you wish for a foreground or background color, but you can also then put a pattern over the top of that, so it's easy to distinguish between one column and the other. So even if this was printed out or that it was done with grayscale, there's still a way to distinguish the individual columns from each other and not solely using color alone. But again, that could be another whole webinar on its own, putting color inside documents.
And probably good to mention too that as well as the accessibility checker within Word itself, that there's products such as this one here. Now, can I check that sharing?
Yes.
Yes. So the color contrast analyzer, which lets you then actually go in and pick some colors. So if I take that, formatting off. Oh, didn't want to.
It's highlighting that's on it. Yep. Oh, there we go.
I just wanted to change the font color to something that's going to be.
Yep. So this color contrast analyzer, there's a link to that program. It's also available for Mac as well, I believe. At the start of the document, there's a link off to this, which is so it doesn't operate just within a web browser. There's lots that do that, but this is a nice little free tool that just runs on the desktop that you can use to check anything that you like inside the document.
And so you pick a foreground color, and so you can go in and you can select the color. Now I use this in graphics and headings and all sorts of things that I make. And then you can pick a background color, and then down the bottom it gives you a report of how that goes in terms of the WCAG standards and meeting those and the different levels. So you can check basically that if a color combination you are using or would like to use has a high enough
just before you close
ratio.
that, just before you close it, Justin, can you just turn off the sliders where it's got all the individual color values for each one, because it does look very busy there.
Gotcha.
So normally your tool will just open like that, where you can use the eyedropper and select a foreground color and a background color, so you can check your font and the background color, or even the color of a graph and something in the background. And there's a link at the start of the document that's there to that under the color. So you can quickly check again, because it's one of those, I've got no idea if this is 4.5 to 1 ratio according to the standards. I don't know. So we need tools to do some of this. There's some which are obvious. You'll look at some, very light gray text on white that's hard to read, and you'll know that's just going to be problematic for everybody. Or if you've got some glare on the screen, etc., it's problematic. But this then compares these results, because this is based on the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG, and it tells you where and how that passes. So your institution will have its own adherence towards the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. They might say we're WCAG AA compliant or AAA compliant. If somebody is, I'd like to know, but AA compliant, and to what level are A compliant. And this tells you how this then passes, whether it's level A, level AA, level AAA. So you can look at your institution and find out some accessibility info, which should be ideally from the main website. There should be an accessibility statement with a link off to what level of compliance you adhere to, and then you can make sure that you're adhering to that. And saying, look, it meets these things. You can see that it passes for small text, it passes for large text, which is what it needs to meet AA minimum.
And Darren, can I just add that Peter has added into the chat that you can make an accessible palette. Now, that's something that I've wanted to do, but I haven't got into, Peter. So I'll definitely be looking at that link you've provided there, because again, if you can make things templates, if you can make things set up in your Word documents as the new document, or automatically has these templates added to them, it makes your workflow a lot easier. You do it once and everything you create is, has a set of colors that you've already chosen that you know are effective.
Yep. There's also I think there's various simulators and things. Look, there's one of those also listed on the front page. There's lots of them around. There's one that I use, Silktide, which allows you to try out different combinations of color, try different color blindness types, and also simulate some various vision impairments, etc., so you can see what's actually happening with your content and how it actually looks. So there's some useful tools there to play with. If we
And
have
just
time to go over.
And just one really quick thing to add, Darren. Again, this comes back to me about the point of UDL. We're talking about accessibility, but in terms of the UDL approach and flexibility, setting your document up correctly in Word, setting it up using styles means that if something needs to change, a user can go in and globally change things very quickly to suit their very specific requirements in terms of, you know, color difference and, you know, their own color perception and things like that. So it's just reinforcing that, setting it up properly first.
Two more quick things that I'll quickly point out before we move on too much from color or get to some questions. One is, yes, this table, a good way to represent this table and some other stuff is not, again, just visually, but you should also add the tabular data there so somebody can navigate the table. They're not relying just on vision alone to, you know, analyze and look at what this data is. So alternate text can certainly work as well. I've forgotten what the other point is that I was going to make.
It'll come back.
It'll come back.
It'll come back. And look, and something again, we sort of touched on this above with the red text in the black paragraph. Just be mindful of referencing color for instructional purposes. For example, click on the green button because someone may not be able to perceive the green button the same way you do. So, you know, if that means they're seeing it in grayscale, as we said before, or there's a color vision deficiency, you need to make sure that you use appropriate labels against context to make it meaningful rather than just relying on color alone.
Yep, and there's also, look, there's a point there which might agitate some people as well. There's a green button that says click here. Your button should never say click here. You shouldn't be doing that. It should actually say what the function of that button is. So that's put in there just to, again, call reference to that. So again, this goes into our next section, which is on that clear and concise, but I might just quickly backtrack a couple of questions. There's been some great answers. Thank you, John. Thank you again, jumping in and answering some of those Q&A questions that's in there.
Yeah, we've got some links to different
really good resources for those. We do want to move on, even though people are putting things into the Q&A. Thank you, and we'll look at some of those because we do want to allow maybe the second or the last third, at least, of this session to be an open session where we can just have a conversation and not get stuck in the doing, but start opening it up to further conversation. So, if that's fine with everybody, we might just quickly move on to the next section, which is around clear and concise language.
Yeah, so look, this is a really important one because this is something that affects everybody. Again, it's a UDL issue, but the WC3 Web Accessibility Initiative, the WAI, developed standards for understanding and implementing accessibility. And when they talk about writing for accessibility, they're talking about using simple language and formatting and making sure that it's appropriate for the context again. So reflecting on what the context is, writing in short, clear sentences and paragraphs, avoiding unnecessarily complex words and phrases, expanding acronyms on their first use, so giving context to what they see further in the document. Consider providing a glossary for terms readers may not know. And that's really important about this unnecessarily complex ones because there are going to be there's going to be a vocabulary about the particular topic or subject that you're talking about, and providing an easy way to understand those terms is a great idea. A personal thing I like is if it's a learning context, sometimes glossaries can be a collaborative exercise where students can actually work and create a glossary for a topic or something like that. But if it's a document you're providing, make sure you provide links to that information. Use a list for formatting as appropriate. So again, you know, if you can avoid a table, if it doesn't need to be a table, if it's just for layout, as we touched on earlier, maybe consider a list because it's easier to visually navigate and get to the point. And then consider using images, so UDL, using images, illustrations, you know, multiple means of representation to help clarify that need as well. So keeping those sort of things in mind means that the text that you're providing on the topic, on the document or the learning resource is as accessible as it can be. So what we've got here is, now we won't read through these, but 3 examples of some not so concise writing. And concise writing in education, I can see at a glance that it's very wordy. When I scan it, I can pick up that there's some, there's some words there that I might not be familiar with, some language which I might find difficult, and it may not be at a reading level or as concise as it possibly could be. So now that's from ChatGPT. I can see again this one here. Now this is using ChatGPT to do my summarizing. So I did get it to write it for me in the first instance, but you might draft a block of text and go, right, I've got my concept out of my head. I'm ready now to refine it. ChatGPT does a great job at summarizing content and bringing it down to an easier reading level or a specific year reading level. And so that's what I've done here. And then further to that, I then added it in, and there's a type of writing called plain language, which means that it's very accessible. In the States, I believe there's some legislation around it required, but it's about making sure that the writing is accessible to a minimum standard of education to make sure that everyone can clearly understand what's being asked of them. And the basis of that is concise and clear language by doing that. So just in case you haven't used something like ChatGPT, if I copy that text and go to my browser, so what the important thing is to give it an appropriate prompt. So please, now I still use courtesy to ChatGPT. I can't help it. Please summarize the following to a more concise paragraph. Paste in that. Oh, okay. Not sure about that. Anyway, maybe
the AI has
there you go.
us. No.
Yeah, no, here it goes. So, well, no, that was actually about the same. Okay. Now that it's done that work for me, I would then use my time now to edit that and make sure that it says exactly what I want it to say. But you can further say summarize. Oh, sorry. Rewrite to make it 7 level. Okay, and so again, this is where ChatGPT is pretty clever and pretty useful for giving you that quick turnaround of something for you then to work and refine and make sure that it works in a way that is effective and it's not missing any of the points. Definitely don't just get it to do something and paste it in. You need to review it. But that's the benefit of those sort of tools. There's some links in the document to some other resources. I think that's this is in your document as well, and some great local resources from Australia about how to write concisely. And what we thought we would do is we would, as an activity, we would get you to think about being concise, and there's an instruction. So concise language is not only just important in paragraphs and blocks of text, but instructions, that's something that need to be really worked on to make sure that they're clear, explicit, so that students or people reading your document know what they need to do next. And being concise is a very important part of that. So we've got some text here. I'm going to pop that into the chat. If people wanted to have a go at just rewriting that in a much more concise manner, the context would be a student or a colleague working through a document and they need to do an activity. And someone's saying that there's some issues that ChatGPT is not up to yet. Absolutely. And look, as if you're a subject matter expert, an academic or a teacher or an educator, it definitely can't fill in for you, but it can just help refine things, and especially as a learning designer, I use it to sort of quickly make concise versions of things, maybe for a summary for a page. So I might leave the original text in there, but I might pop a little summary at the top, and that's useful for those sort of things.
Yep, thank you. Look, there's some great discussions going on in chat and some really good tips that are there. Yes, we're going to touch on quickly, so we might show that while people are having a bit of a think. And that's also the editor tool inside Word,
yes.
which can certainly, so if you select some text and go
Awesome.
to the editor,
Yep.
it's actually open there on the tab you're on, right hand side. There we go. It'll give you an editor score, and it'll also help you with conciseness, the formality of the writing. So this is checking the entire document. And again, so it'll pick up some bits and pieces in
So
there.
if I go down to that document, just select that piece. That's what you were getting at, I think, Darren.
Yeah,
Is
I think
that
it goes
right?
across the whole document.
Does it? Okay.
That's there. Yep.
But yeah, that certainly is a useful guide to help pick up on things. But yeah, reviewing the content is definitely important.
But the editor, look, that's something else that we could, we haven't actually got a guide to, but there's a couple of really good Microsoft guides on using the editor that will get the links and put those up with the recording as well. So you can specify with the editor this type of writing that you're doing, whether that's formal, whether it's this, etc. And if you're like me, I've got a second version of Word just sitting open that I can cut and paste some stuff into and quickly make some changes to, and then bring that back into the main document. So you're not having to search the entire document or process the whole document that you might be working on until you need to at the end.
Okay. Do you have any? Yeah, so we've got some examples there. For instructions, click the document with the red title below and download it. It talks about how food we eat can affect the health of different groups of people. Read it and write it down for the five most important things. Sorry, read it and write down the most important things it says. Just list 5 important points. So that's nice plain language. The only thing I'd say there, Morgan, is that reference to the red title below. That was sort of I put that in on purpose to think about. If we're just referring to the colour, we will miss. Some people won't be able to access it. So you probably want to say, click the document titled such and such instead, rather than just relying on colour alone.
Yep, Elizabeth's picked up on that there as well, and says Peter, a few people putting the document title in there. So download, as Peter's got the document. Effects of nutritional choices on health outcomes, list 5 main points in the article.
So
I don't think you get much more concise than that.
Yeah, so comparing the two very easily, you can see then that's not going to be confusing. It's not ambiguous in any way. It's clear. It's not overwhelming. Thank you very much, Peter.
Yep. Safira has put in from that first long-winded one and used Grammarly in there to get a shorter version out with Grammarly. So exactly what our students are going to be doing.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, so moving on with the document, the next thing we wanted to talk about is naming files. So it's really important to, we spoke about last week about meaningful descriptive names for links, and the similar issue applies to files. So give your files meaningful names that have, giving your files meaningful names can have a large impact on the discoverability and understanding of the information. So your students are more than likely studying more than one subject, and helping them to distinguish your files and their purpose can assist them bypassing the where is it and get directly to the studying it. So thinking about that, my own case, I have a downloads folder. Most of our files get downloaded there. When you go in there and start looking through for particular information without appropriate file names, you might end up with multiple tutorial activity.docx, tutorial activity.docx, and you don't know how to distinguish between them. So using a file naming convention is important. So asking that question, do you use a file naming convention? And how easy are your files to search for or find? So Darren gave a great example of suggesting that educators and academics, download all their content of their files or have a look at their files and say, how would I find something in this folder or this group of folders? How would I navigate and find a particular week's activity?
We used to. Sorry, Justin.
No,
Yeah,
go
we
ahead.
used to have an activity as an introduction, well, not introduction, but for staff, some training that we did, and that was download all of your files that have been created for your unit, not necessarily external ones, but all the things that have been created at the institution, at least maybe for the first 5-6 weeks of your subject if you can, or for your unit. Download everything that you can from it, put it all in one folder, and then try and work out what's what. Because that's what you're asking the students to do in week 11, week 12 when they're revising. And they have to go back into the unit, re-find it. They know they downloaded it, it's somewhere, but because it was just called lecture or it was just called this, along with another 3 subjects they may well be studying, it can just get really confusing. So helping reduce that cognitive burden of having to find something and what is it before you even get to studying it. And this is particularly important for students that may be using some assistive technologies, etc. This benefits everybody, but particularly assistive technologies, finding what that file is without having to open everything, read first, have it read out first couple of lines, what is it, or go all the way back through navigating your LMS back through various weeks. That again, if the context isn't there and it just says week 3, but it doesn't tell you what the topic was for week 3, and the headings aren't there to give you any kind of navigation, I've known some students that spend 2 hours just going through to find one file. That if it was named correctly, they would have just found, and when they downloaded it, it would have been there ready for them. Maybe named with the week, maybe named with a title, etc. So just think about what you're asking the students to do with those files, and making them discoverable for them, and letting them know that naming convention. There's nothing wrong with saying all the assignments will be listed as this, all the file names for all the assessments will have this prefix or something, just so it's easy to recognize. If I've downloaded it, I know where to go and where to look at that.
And look, as you develop more content too, once you start using file naming conventions and using them consistently, it carries across to videos you create. For myself, making learning objects like H5P objects, giving them a relevant name so that when you search for them later, for you as the developer, it's much easier to find and it speeds the process up as well. So looking, as Darren said, let users know the files are using a convention and explain that. So there's some examples of some poor names there. So lecture slides.ppt, so PowerPoint, what week, what subject, what's it about? There's nothing telling me or giving me any context. UBE final 3.pdf. I don't know what that was standing for, Darren, but it's a good one because it certainly doesn't make any sense or give you any clarity about what it's about its content. And assessment, yes, it's assessment. Is it 1, 2, or 3? What subject or what unit am I working on? So some examples there. UBE, which is obviously a unit or a course name. Week 1, introduction lecture.ppt. I can see it's in week 1. I can see it's an introduction lecture. Now it's a PowerPoint and I know the name of the unit. And the same applies then for the other 2, the document and the PDF as well. It's giving a clear description of what it is, the same way that a link does to an online resource. It makes it easier to get to, but also makes it easier to find, as Aaron said, in those folders.
It's also, if you've named your file well, then that's also a good precursor to the link for that file being made well as well, because you've already given it a nice description, in a sense, enough information to know the context of that. So when you put a link in, you can just expand on that. That's there. There's a few questions in the chat, certainly around using spaces and systems not liking spaces, different operating systems, etc. I've gone from having done underlines, using dashes, to using spaces. And I haven't come to a consensus yet. I found somebody that has a system, but if anybody certainly has a good rule of thumb that's there, or there's a standard for file naming, I would certainly appreciate some pointers on that.
I certainly use the dashes to avoid that. I used to use underscores, but I find that's much easier to understand. And obviously in file names, you can't use other special characters, things like that, like slashes and stuff like that. But there's no one way of doing it too. I think Darren was saying it's like, if you come up with maybe your unit, maybe your team comes up with a consistent name convention. If your university or institution doesn't have one, you can come up with your own and then just stick to that.
Yeah, I think, look, so there's a couple of questions in chat I'll just quickly address, and that's one with putting in subject codes. Do you need to put the full thing in? Do you need to put the number or just the abbreviation that the students now know that as? Because it can be quite long-winded versus maybe just the 3 initials or the 4 initials or whatever that might be, depending on how that is within your LMS. But again, that's your choice. That is also dating file names. If it's something that's going to be reused, don't put a date in it. If it's the subject guide for this year, then yes, do put a date into it. If it's only relevant for a short period, then you can add that date. But again, we're trying to make things sustainable if possible. So if it is something that you're planning on reusing, then yeah, there's no need to put a date in there.
Yeah, give it a longer shelf life than having to go back and rename it. Something I would consider, and in terms of learning design, volume of learning is something that I like to try and display to students. So if I'm adding it to an LMS, I'll often have the volume of learning. This is a 20-minute read or something like that, or a 30-minute video in the LMS description. But you could consider adding things like that, maybe to a video or something like that, just to say how long it is. That might be useful in some respect. But again, that's up to you. So look, our next activity then, we're thinking of a file name for a resource and asking you to share your ideas in the chat. And what we've done is we've created a graphic organizer, a Venn diagram. It's in an MS Word document, and it's the 3rd activity for students to download and complete during the week 4 online tutorial. And it's in your subject, Health 4870. And what you're asking them to do is to read about the topic of the pros and cons of plant-based diets. And after completing the activity, students need to save it for reference later in the unit and course. So what would you think, based on maybe your organisation or how you work, what would you consider naming that Word document as? And as we said, there's no completely right or wrong about it. Someone mentioned earlier about the long name and things like that. That's certainly something to take into consideration. Do you have space for that? Is that always going to show up in a Windows or Mac Explorer window easily, or is it going to have to be stretched out to see the full name? Yeah, just basically it's coming up with what works for you and what will make it meaningful.
Yep, there's some good suggestions certainly coming up in chat there.
And I just noticed, Darren, someone mentioned above, I think you mentioned it too, a few people, camel case. Yes, that camel case is a great idea. So correct me if I'm wrong, but that is
capitalization of the first letter of each, which can be useful. And as I think John pointed out, snake case, I haven't heard that for a while. Yes, snake case when you do the underlined underscores.
Right.
Yes.
I didn't realise that was what it's called.
That's in there. Yep.
Excellent. Yeah, that was my go-to, but for some reason I changed to dashes. Yeah, look, there's some great activities there, and people putting in the whole unit code at the start, the week, and again, you can see how clear, how much more descriptive that is, and coming across that document later then.
And again,
context.
using abbreviations in there, there's nothing wrong with, so long as students are well aware of that. So putting W4 to represent week 4 without having to type out week all the time, and things like that, or ACT just for activity to let people know this is what it is. If you're consistent and you've got that up front in your subject saying if the resources for the subject are named as such, then it's a much easier way for students to even search for. Because again, find it can be certainly a screen reader's friend, but I'm just looking for a document. I just want to quickly look for ACT 5 because I'm looking for activity 5 because I know it's going to be labeled as that. It's just so much easier process than trawling through the documents. And consider, a student told me this many years ago, I've never forgotten, for one subject they got to week 10 and they were going through the folder and they screen shared to try and find something that was there. And again, the naming convention was all over the place. There wasn't one. But there was 390 different files for this one subject by the time they'd gotten to week 10 alone, along with files that were extra readings, things they had to download from the library. So trying to find anything, and they tried to put things into week folders, but some things needed to be used across multiple weeks. So yeah, imagine trying to dig through all of those files to find something. So hence, go back to the LMS, go back to find the right week, find where the thing was, try and download it again, and do all of that. Just adds extra work and gets in the way of getting clearly straight to the learning.
Yeah,
But some really good examples.
There are fantastic, and yeah, as you said, Darren, and it's inequitable. It's putting a burden on students that shouldn't be there when they, they just need to access the information. They might be very time poor, and making it more equitable by making it easier to do. And then you carry across this to your professional work as well, in your own file managing.
Peter's got a really good point there. If you're putting things into a week order, think of the sorting for file names of people doing that. So if you're using 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., put a 0 in front of them. It will help with the sorting so that week 10 doesn't come up first. It's there, etc. So yeah, or the other way around. Yeah, just put in zeros before those, which is a really good point. But no, look, fantastic. And if you're anything like me, you've got a downloads folder for things on the internet. If you open it up and look back even a couple of days, I've got no idea what some of those files are that I downloaded. They're just gibberish file names in some cases, or at the time I knew exactly what it was. You just go to PDF and there's like 10 of them from that day. I don't know what one's what. And so generally, like me, get to the end of a semester or something and just end up clearing everything out that I've downloaded because I don't know what they are. I'm not using them. They're not relevant anymore. They may have been if I didn't move them or put them into a folder at the right time. Then they just get lost. So it just becomes noise, and you don't want your files to be noise amongst other subjects that the students are studying.
Yeah. Okay, so we're ready to move on to the accessibility checker then, Darren?
Yes.
Yeah, no worries. And look, just something to mention is that all of the strategies we've been talking about last week and this week, they're actually quite small and they're quite easy to accommodate in your practice, but they make a big difference to a very large group of people, in different ways. And so it's not something, it's just something to try and incorporate into your workflow so that it becomes just how you work, but that flow on benefit is really beneficial. And it means for things like remediation of accessibility issues down the track, it's a lot easier to do because most, the document's mostly set up accessibly, and there might just be a small amount of work needed to completely fix it. But okay, so you've got to a point where you've been using some of your strategies and things like that. You've created a document and you want to just go through now and check for accessibility, and Word has a great accessibility checker. So it's available in the whole suite of our MS Office products and brings up and lets you remedy or remediate accessibility issues. So basically to access the accessibility button. So there's one down here in the footer. I've got the accessibility option there, or I can select the accessibility ribbon menu. Now, I've actually got something here which is installed, which is a third-party one, which I won't talk about, but I just go into the file. This is my favorite way of finding things. And now I've got my accessibility checker. Oh, look, Darren, that thing disappeared again.
Yep.
We've had some, so I had to turn that off, didn't I?
Yes.
Is that right?
There's a couple of things with the accessibility checker. Again, the accessibility checker is your friend and it will help you. One thing I would suggest, as Justin's doing there, is one, you can use the search to quickly find something if you're not sure which ribbon it's buried in. But there's an option at the bottom of the accessibility checker window, or panel, should I say, that has you to keep accessibility checker running while you work. So this is really handy while you're putting a document together, and that gives you that little description down the bottom left in the footer of Windows, which is showing you accessibility, and it's saying investigate. For the bit. So as you're going through and doing it, it'll pick up things as you're doing it. It might say, "Oh, check the contrast, investigate." So you can correct things at the time rather than I've used it now exactly that same thing consistently all the way through the document. I get to the end and do a check and find out what I've done needs to be fixed across all instances. So it's handy if you've got the time, put the accessibility checker on while you're building the document, and just monitor at the side when it comes up with things and say, oh, this picture doesn't have alt text. That's right, I forgot to put alt text, or maybe this one is descriptive or decorative, so I say, and I can just
be proactive
on that picture. Yeah, so it just helps keep accessibility front of mind while you're working on the document. So look, It doesn't cover everything. It'll make some suggestions. There's still bits you'll need to determine whether something is a decorative image or not. Some of the colors you'll still need to go and manually check, or you can check some contrast with things. But it has a really good bunch of information now. Why should you fix it? Steps to actually go and fix it. So it's actually a really useful first port of call tool. Now, accessibility checker doesn't cover, like things that we covered today with the naming of files. Because it's not part of necessarily the accessibility or the web content guidelines. That's just a good bit of inclusive practice that helps everybody. And that's what we've been looking at with all of these things. This isn't specifically for somebody that might have a disability that might be using our resources. We're trying to make our resources more discoverable, more navigable, and more clear for everybody that uses them, which is a win-win situation. So quickly, because I know it's 2:08, if we just want to go back to the slides, Justin. So just on, again, context that we brought up in the first one. So why are you doing it? Why is it here? What's that? Which certainly helps you with the naming of things. It helps you with if you're putting color in, and does it have meaning? Does it need to be there? If so, then you can reference it or not reference it. Next slide, please. So enough about context. Oh, we already had the break. Thank you. No, we already had that break. So quickly to the UDL, and then we'll get into some discussion as well. So I think this is really important, and Justin pointed this out, pointed out to everybody as well. You can do accessibility. You may have heard this as well. You can do accessibility without universal design for learning, but you can't do UDL without accessibility. So it's a good starting spot for universal design for learning. Remember that UDL strategies are not accommodations for individual students. They're proactive approaches that benefit all students, and hence, therefore, accessible learning resources are a fundamental strategy that benefits everybody. So they're a key strategy in implementing UDL. So yeah, if you keep those things in mind, accessibility is not just for a few, it's for everybody. And it's a great basis for building that universal design. Justin, I'll throw over to you. Anything to add?
Look, no, just that making a start with documents like this, it's been identified as a really good point to start with UDL, because it's something that we're doing every day. We're constantly making these resources, and if we can make them as accessible as possible, then when they go out to students or to colleagues or whatever, they can make choice as to how they access the document. It gives them a lot of flexibility to use tools like Immersive Reader to control how things look, and above all, to be equitable, to make sure that people who are not just visually accessing the resources still get all the information and nuance and context that you want them to get. And again, that's good for everybody, and yeah, as Elizabeth said, accessibility is universal. As we get older, as our personal circumstances change, there might be times where you need to use some of these accessibility features, and then you realize the importance of them, how much they can either slow you down by not being there, or make things much more hard for you to, increase cognitive load, make it harder to understand and navigate and interact with resources.
It's true. And look, there's a couple of quick questions I'll touch on, and then we'll open up if there's some other questions. John, very good question. John's asked, are we going to cover accessible multimedia and universal design for learning today? We've just covered the UDL bit briefly to point people in the right direction with some things, and we will have links up on the website for the resources that are on AdSet, and the link off to the e-learning, where you can go and do an e-learning on universal design that's there, that covers a lot of those basics. We did have captioning and some things that we were going to do with multimedia, but we decided to leave those out of the session today. Just purely we wanted to allow a little bit more time for some discussion at the end, rather than get bogged down into multimedia, because there's so many different ways, shapes that can be there, and different interactive elements, from H5P through to videos through to other quizzes, etc. And they can all be topics unto themselves that probably are a little bit more specific for what we wanted to cover with some of the basics. So we did leave that off. So sorry, John, if you were hanging or somebody came specifically for the multimedia bit, we might do another session on some of those, but we're hoping...
Put that as a suggestion to AdSet when you get your survey. Put that as a suggestion for another session.
Something, and again, we did say this was going to cover some of the basics, and we hope we've helped people that haven't already dipped their toe, so to speak, into the water with some of this to feel a bit more confident in doing it, or those that are already in this space to do that. So I'm just quickly, while anybody thinks of questions, I'm just going to quickly throw up an exit poll that we had last time, the same thing for this one. How soon do you think you'll start implementing one or more of these accessibility strategies that we covered today? So in the next document I create, in the next week or so, in the next month or two, when I next review my unit and resources, and I will need more training or support to use these strategies.
Oh, now Alexandra has asked about the cursor. So you can control the cursor in your Windows settings. So I think it might be ease of access again. I'm not sure, Darren. So I know I have my cursor as a large blue one, so that's very visible, and that was for presentations, but I like it. I can kept it that way for myself now because it's easier to see where it is if the page is busy. But I'm just looking at ease of access to see if that's where you can change the those specific shapes.
Yeah, so look, there's various cursor settings that you can put in there, just changing the mouse settings through things from speed, have your cursor through to what it looks like, and even the the style, the caret that sits there where that is on screen while you're doing things.
Is that Windows setting sharing, Darren?
Yes, that's sharing. Yep.
Yeah, so that's that was typing in cursor in the search area there, and then you can control. I think that might have been what you were talking about. But yeah, you can change the cursor thickness as well, things like that. But definitely good for presenting.
Okay, so we might just use a couple of minutes here. Feel free to raise your hand if you've got any questions, and then I'll close the poll in a moment. But if you've got any questions, feel free to raise your hand, or if you want to just share, something you're particularly stuck on, and we might tailor a workshop towards that. But while people are thinking if they've got some more questions or they want to talk, I'll just let you know these workshops are part of hopefully an ongoing series, and we were designing these along with the assistive technology community practice, which Justin's a part of, to look at delivering this, and this has been built on from some work that's been happening at Deacon's, work that's been happening at AdSet, and some work that's been happening at CQ. CUQ. I always get that wrong. Sorry, Justin. CQU. That's there, etc. And we'll be hoping to roll these out to various campuses to be very specific. So tailor-made ones where we can look at what's 3 or 4 things at your institution that really, we need some basic training on. And I'll be able to come and work with one of the assistive tech community practice people or with some learning designers there, and we can develop some workshops if need be that are very specific and tailored to your individual needs. But there'll be more information about that on AdSet as we move along. Michelle, you've got your hand up.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Very great session and a lot of absorption. It'll take me a little while to absorb it. I just popped into the chat because I thought maybe this is better in the multimedia session when we get it up. I'm at an organisation that's done lots of, I'll probably give it away by using the term virtual learning. So the teacher in present, not self-paced, that type of learning. So the teacher present or the trainer present. And I've noticed a shift from just very, very recently from a real insistence on everybody having their cameras on, whether it's a staff meeting or whether it's, a learning session with students, to a recent shift in encouraging people to put their cameras on, but if they identify, for example, as neurodiverse, they may not choose to use the camera. And I was just a bit curious about, I kind of feel a bit uncomfortable that they're sort of singling it out in that way, but I'm also just a little bit curious about what's always been sold to me about the engagement of having the camera on and what alternatives there might be if somebody was choosing the camera off because it actually improves their learning and uptake. Is it better somewhere else?
No, look, I think it's a very topical question as well. Look, I think singling out and saying that's why we're doing this, I think that's unnecessary, as it is with most things. If we're doing an inclusive approach, then that the viability of turning your camera off should be available to everybody for a range of reasons. You may not be feeling well today. You're having a bad hair day. Your room's messy. Whatever reason that might
I had
be.
trouble with the connection today. I had to drop back a few times.
Yeah, and for some students, again, we've got some remote students that will have their camera off just to help with bandwidth that they're feeding through. So, look, I think giving people that choice so that people don't constantly, again, some of the research that show people feel they have to be engaged when the camera's on. I have to be looking like I'm attentive. Just because I might be sitting there like that doesn't mean I'm not absorbing things. I've just been Zoom fatigued all day, or I've been in, as the research has shown, I've been sitting paying attention, feeling like I need to be on all the time. So I think not singling people out, I think, is a really good it's a good option just to say, look, this is available for everybody. Turn it on if you wish. If you wish to raise a question or you want to talk, I think it's worth turning the camera on if somebody feels comfortable to do that. And again, because there may be some students that are lip reading, or you want, again, that engagement while somebody's talking. So it's not just a voice from nowhere. And again, that notion of somebody raising their hand and then introducing them, because I may not be listening and I don't know who's actually speaking. So by saying, Michelle, you've got a question or whatever that might be, just helps pace that along, that it's not just a whole bunch of voices talking over each other and screaming for attention.
Darren, could I add to that, part of that process too is thinking about an online session as more a traditional classroom, and that you need to use various strategies to engage your students. So it's okay to have the camera off, as Darren said, for all those reasons, but you can still check in with your students to ensure that they're participating using questions like we've done, to get people to provide answers in the chat, or to have a shared whiteboard where people can contribute anonymously without feeling like they're being focused on, and they can participate comfortably without being anxious or anything like that. So in terms of your classroom management skills, you need to check in, ask questions, prompt people, provide them with options, as I said, to participate in different ways. Having the camera off doesn't mean that they're not listening. It can be, as you said, Michelle, there can be a variety of reasons. It can be to not in terms of overload. It can be to ensure that they can listen and focus on the content rather than be distracted by backgrounds and things like that that might cause them concern.
Yep. Look, John's just pointed out a really good point. Thank you, Michelle. John's pointed out in there, again, as avatars are becoming more common across the platforms, I see certainly more of it in Teams than necessarily in Zoom at the moment, but I think that's only a matter of time before that starts to jump in. There'll be some AI that will take some screenshots and hold that image of you that's there, again, for bandwidth purposes. If you start having larger and larger meetings and things that are starting to happen with some of these tools, sometimes it's impractical if you've got 1,600 students in an online session to have all the cameras on and doing things. It can become noise and distracting if there's no need for them to be on necessarily. And just having people's cameras on doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be engaging. I know there was a lot of fear at the start of COVID and jumping online saying, I can't see the students' faces anymore, and I don't know if they're paying attention. But from that,
and can I say that to John, I went to an online conference late last year, the Digicon event, and there were loads of people using avatars, and it was great. There was it was a presence, and it gave people the opportunity to display themselves in a way that they felt really comfortable with, and it was a talking point and things like that. So yeah, it's definitely a way forward.
And just quickly, there was a question earlier on that I missed there from Alexandra, and that was dot points okay in a list. That, I think that's the perfect point to put dot points in. That's what they're there for. Put them into a list that's there. If they're sequential, they need to be numbered, fine. Otherwise, bullet points is fine. And using, again, the built-in styling with inside Word to do the bullet points. Don't just use the bullet symbol and put things in, because that does not make a list. But using the actual functions that are there I've posted a link quickly in chat for AdSet Assist to give that another little plug that's there, so that can help with some one-on-one sessions or some small group sessions if you want to book half-hour session on anything we covered today or anything else to do with assistive technology or accessibility. That's there, and I'm more than happy to sit and have a chat, and that's a free service via AdSet. I'll just quickly end the poll that we had open, and I'll share the results of that. I think that's fantastic. For the
Excellent.
poll, how soon do you think you'll be able to start implementing one or more of these accessibility strategies? 73% in the next document I create, and another 14% on that in the next week or so. Look, I think that's fantastic. And that might be because you've all come in with these skills, and this has just refreshed and renewed your enthusiasm to keep doing this. But I also hope we've got a few new converts into the mix here. Accessibility is not easy. It's something that takes time, and we're always learning in this space. And I would just like to say a big thank you to everybody that certainly participated into the chat. I think there's a few people we may have to put on staff, which is brilliant. If AdSet was funded, we could put you on staff. It's a story for another day. There's some fantastic feedback in there, and we'll be going through that and pulling out some of those answers and tips that people have put in and putting that up onto the website with the recordings as they go up. But really do appreciate that. Just quickly, sorry, bear with me. And we'll get an email we'll be sending out shortly when the recording for the workshop's available, along with those links. And we'd like to please share that with your colleagues. We will be sending a link when this finishes to a short survey on this workshop. So please do fill that in and sign up for the AdSet newsletter if you're not already there, and these links will be put into chat. Also, there's 2 upcoming webinars, Beyond Accommodations, Why Universal Design Matters for All Learners, and Digital Maths, the Future of Inclusion and How We Can Get There. Details for those popping up in chat there as well. But I'll just stop sharing that and close that and just say thank you and throw over to you, Justin. Anything you wish to add?
No, look, just thank you for everyone coming along, and I think it's wonderful to be enthusiastic and wanting to make a change for students who may already have disadvantage, and to make it more equitable for everybody in education. And I think it's a very important thing.
Look, and I'll re-reference one last thing, and that is, look, all of these things that are here are things that we can teach students as well. So some of these techniques, some of these bits can be part of, the rubrics and things for our assessments, etc. And that's a good multimedia one, maybe when we get to one on multimedia. But getting students to create captions, getting students to create transcripts, getting students to make sure they put headings and structures into their documents, will put them in good stead, that the documents they create are universal and can be used. Regardless of the platform that they're put on, and regardless of the device the person's using. So look, we're setting students up for the future, so let's give them the skills to do that, and accessibility is one of those skills that can help our students thrive. But thank you everybody for joining us for the 2 workshops. I know it's a big ask, 2 90-minute workshops, but we definitely do appreciate you coming along, and for all the great feedback that we've got for it, and hopefully we'll see you all again soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks everyone. Bye-bye.